Samir, Saran, you lost your voice the last couple of days, but India's voice was heard loud and clear on the global stage. Your before and after postmortem in terms of what you thought we'll end up with and where this Delhi declaration really leaves us.
Look, Rahul, we are thrilled. I think what we have been able to put together is outstanding and under the circumstances is beyond anyone's expectation. So if anyone says they knew this would be the net result of the meeting, they deserve an Oscar. So I am clearly thrilled right now. I am over the moon. I'm proud to belong to India that was able to put together a very ambitious is the operating word here, declaration, which and this is something that Ian and I will have a longer conversation on later. But I think this document, in some sense, is the intellectual and political successor to the outcome at Pittsburgh in 2009. At that time, we had put together an economic framework for the future. The G20 replaced the G8 at that time and became the body for economic coordination. I think this time around, G20, despite the Ukraine crisis and the distractions and attendant discussions on that particular subject, this has become the development G20. SDGs, Global South, and issues that matter to humanity have been catered to in this particular document. The successor to Pittsburgh, a new phase of on the actions of Russia without villainizing Russia, but more focus on upholding principles, which again suits all the G20 countries, especially some who face other neighbors who may want to change international boundaries. But please understand, the Security Council with members who belong to the G20 could not pass a similar resolution in that council. One of them used to veto it. Here, 20 countries with veto passed that very simple upholding of international law and the UN Charter. So it's really something to be able to make that happen. So all credit to Team India, all credit to the Prime Minister, Foreign Minister and the Sherpa. I'm happy, Rahul.
Ian Bremmer, I was reading just before we set this live show up, a piece in Bloomberg which looked at what was happening in Delhi as a mini face-off, India versus China, Modi versus Xi, and saying to the extent that this was a limited contest, Modi scored 1 over Xi or India scored 1 over China. Given the end outcome, do you think that's a fair assessment?
Sure, but I mean, let's keep in mind a couple of things. One is that the Indian economy is growing gangbusters right now. Modi, very popular at home, has a strong relationship with the United States and will, whether Biden or Trump is successful in 2024, very strong relationship with Japan, but also has not alienated, at least not yet, major members of the Global South. China's in a very different position. I mean, the big headlines this week, Xi Jinping not showing up at the G20, Italy announcing they're going to be leaving Belt and Road. The Indonesians, of course, they were thought to be the most important new member joining the BRICS. They chose not to be a part of it because they didn't want to have to be making choices or perceived as making choices against the G7. So this is not a good time for China. It's not a great week for China. I'm not surprised that India is making successful noises, but there's also been a lot of headlines in the United States that this is showing that China's somehow jettisoning the existing world order, that they want to build their own. They're not going to be any part of the G20 going forward. That's not true. I'm willing to bet dollars to donuts on this show next year that Xi Jinping will be in Brazil for their G20 presidency. They will be sending high-level members for the ministerials going forward. This is not suddenly the end of China's meaningful role on the global stage or peak China. Samir and I talked about this at the beginning of the G20, the idea that India is making some great decisions right now, but they're still a minimum of 10 to 15 years behind the Chinese. That doesn't change just because you had a very successful weekend. So good marks for Modi, good marks for India, good marks for everyone attending the G20 this weekend, the G19. You added the African Union, you subtracted the Chinese and the Russians. But going forward, this is a long, long road in a dramatically changing global order.
Samir, Saran, these aren't two countries that punch in the same economic weight category just at this moment. India most certainly behind China in terms of its economic growth story. But to the extent that this was a diplomatic and geopolitical contest, do you buy that at the end of the weekend round, it's Modi 1, Xi 0, India 1, Modi 0, just in the limited context of what was at play in Delhi?
Look, if diplomacy was a boxing round, this round belongs to India. Clearly, but Rahul, something else also happened here. And I think that is the problem when you are absent from big arenas. And maybe that also explained the absence of Xi from G20 this time around. Not only did you see Italy withdrawing from the BRI, but you also saw a bunch of European nations joining up, teaming up with the Middle East and India to put together a new connectivity offering. Something, let's be very clear, is a determined alternative to the BRI. Now, this is $47 trillion of GDP in terms of the countries who have signed up for this agreement. Now, if we can somehow find the leadership and, of course, the courage to make this work out, the $47 trillion countries who have teamed up, I think we can actually carve a more sustainable and certainly a more durable connectivity project in this part of the world that could become an exemplar for when we have to connect into Africa and Latin America and other parts of the world. So I think you are also seeing at this particular moment of time, the countries who have till now only been complaining about the BRI and Chinese action now beginning to try and map out an alternative rather than just protest. So that also happened at this particular time. And I just want to leave one more thought with you. The other image that tickled me coming out of the G20, and again, this is for Kishore and Ian to consider as well, was of the IPSA countries with the US and a joint statement coming after that. So is US coming into the IPSA play? Is that going to be the heft? Is that going to be the financier of IPSA being more ambitious in terms of its development going forward and not having to rely on the BRICS where China becomes the big banker? So I'm just leaving it out there. I think watch that space. IPSA plus USA is an interesting mix.
Kishore Mehbubani, from an Indian point of view, you always come across slightly leaning on the Chinese side. If this was a diplomatic boxing bout, virtually, could you build on what you just heard from Ian and Samir? And would you too concede it's Modi 1, Xi 0, India 1, China 0, just at this moment?
Well, I think the first point I want to emphasize is that economic growth is not a zero-sum game. It's not like playing in a military game, sure, which is a zero-sum game. Economic growth is not. So if India grows, China grows, US grows, it's a positive sum game. But at the same time, I think it's important, as Ian was suggesting, don't judge a boxing match on one weekend or one round. Let me give you my successor is Dean of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, was Professor Denny Kwa, a well-known economist. And he just tweeted this figure. He said that if India grows every year at 2% faster than China, every year 2% faster than China, it will take India 85 years to catch up with China. So, let's be realistic at the end of the day about the economic weight of countries. And you know, and at the end of the day, I think let's forget the zero-sum games and talk about the positive effects. Because what India has done, it has created the G20 as a positive launching pad for the global south. And it actually strengthens Brazil for its next meeting, because now that you have the African Union as a permanent member of the G20, it changes the chemistry of the G20 significantly, because the voice of the global south is represented much more. And that's not a loss, by the way, not necessarily a loss for the United States, and not a loss for China. And the BRI, by the way, all I ask you to do is, you know, in next month, China will be having a BRI summit in Beijing. Ask yourself a simple question. There are 193 countries in the world. Italy has left the BRI. How many countries will come to participate in the BRI meeting in China? You focus on the one that is leaving, or the 140 that are coming. So, you know, these are realities you cannot erase.
Well,
You know, I'm not being pro-China. I'm just giving you data that points out the fact that India's role in the world is growing, China's role in the world is growing, and frankly, the role of the global south is growing, and that's what we should be celebrating.